Sherlock Holmes Chapter One. Man, this is a brilliant game. Most times when we see a portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, it is usually the adult that we know. However, this one was brilliantly designed, looking at him in his younger years, before he ever met John Watson in the canon. And it takes place in Cordona. Now, of course, this game puts out there a warning right ahead of time. I think that they started adding that later in the series. That these games will represent will bring forth stereotypes that were commonplace in the day. Which means they do what they do to keep it historically accurate in the setting. And they do a lot in this game. They did a lot in this game. Now, of course, it is done as a real-time, well, somewhat real-time, open world. And it involves a lot of aspects that were basically key in many Sherlock games prior to it. The Mind Palace, where Sherlock takes the clues that he learns and pieces them together to come up with possible deductions or somewhat, to deduce the truth of what happens. But to control where we can go with Sherlock, we are, of course, limited. For some reason, Sherlock cannot go in the water. In fact, if he gets too close to water or steps too far into water, he goes unconscious. Fade to black. But let us start where the game opens. And trust me, I got everything about this game. Went for the deluxe version and got all the DLC as it came, and all that DLC when it came out. So here we are. Sherlock has come to Cordona. He is accompanied by a friend known as John, which in turn proves to be a very unique individual. In fact, John is sort of an imaginary friend of Sherlock's, which we discover as the main story progresses. In the story, Sherlock is coming to Cordona to find some answers linked to his mother's passing. He doesn't understand everything about it, and he's been wanting to find the truth. In typical open world fashion, they also include side quests and all that. Side cases. Some must be done to progress the story. Some don't show up until you progress in the story, the main story. And those little cases will not show up in your mind palace, so you do have to do some deduction on your own on that. In the course of the game, of course, your first case is a medium, possibly a con artist, is, quote, blamed for a theft. And then as you do a little investigating, just as you do investigations, you find that the quote one object of the one person who was quote the one person who was victimized by the theft apparently is found dead. So this is the first case in which you actually have is a main story case, and you have a decision based on what you find out with two possibilities. In this, you learn about some of your skills that you can use, like eavesdropping. Sometimes you will catch two people talking about something in the course of things, and if you listen, you must pick out the details that are important. Failure, of course, means you have to redo it. However, as it comes to pass, we learn that the wife of a very rude and short-tempered businessman was actually part of a gang in her past, and she was still performing thefts, and that our medium was part of that gang too at one time. So you must decide then and there if you are going to, and you must try and figure out, because the clues point two ways, can point two ways. One, that the medium did it. Two, the husband did it. And of course, you must decide if you want to, quote, absolve or condemn. Of course, the choice there dictates the fates of characters that have no interactions anymore in the story. Once that is solved, Sherlock heads off to their home that was in Cordona, having found a lot of furniture has been sold off from the home. So Sherlock, as part of a side thing, must, of course, reclaim the furniture to refurnish the house. Nice little side quest they add in there. There's also a collection of coins that Mycroft had taken from Sherlock and gave him a task to find them all. I want to say something. For them to stay hidden so long and nobody touch them until Sherlock returns to Cordona, that's amazing. But these are, of course, additional things. Also additional things is memories that are scattered around Cordona, with Sherlock trying to remember his past. However, as we then head there, we also have a chance to go to a cemetery. This is where Sherlock's mother is buried, and where we meet another individual named Werner Vogel, an artist of sorts. And we also really start investigating things related to what happened to Sherlock Holmes. And we also meet some old friends of the family. In fact, a man that lived nearby had a pet elephant that killed him, apparently, recently. And so our first real case in the game is where we're trying to figure out what exactly happened. In the course of events, we also, in order to gain access to certain details, we have to become, quote, one with the police, which also opens up several side quests where you must solve police cases. Those are at least very straightforward until the last one. definitely until the last one. However, as you continue through the cases, you learn more things and find more neat stuff about the island. You also will get cases from Mycroft. And those are very intriguing ones, too. The only downside is the action sections where you have to deal with bandits. I mean, there were some of those. I hated doing those, but because they can be very time consuming, and the goal is you have to shoot off sort of armaments, shoot certain things on them to stun them, and then knock them out. You could kill them, but that's frowned upon. And also, along the way, John will give you challenges to complete. There were some I completed and some I didn't complete. But to get back to the main story, our investigation leads us to some culprits, including a woman dressing as a man, who is actually the daughter of the man who got killed, who is actually the significant other of the daughter of the man who was killed. Now, as you do your investigation into that and find the errant elephant, which is all linked to having to find everything linked to that first police case, you're able to reclaim the elephant. And through your investigations, what you deduce is as follows. The elephant was literally a victim in this. Well, wasn't necessarily meaning to kill. At least in the choices I made. And while the daughter would have preferred the elephant be put down, you can choose to do that, or you can choose to have someone take it somewhere else. Because an elephant really shouldn't be a pet, if you ask me. After that, we move on to the next case, which involves Werner Vogel inviting you to his place, which is an art gallery, but it is definitely has some stuff that's a little out there. I mean, it's definitely one of those weird things. But apparently, a painting was taken. And you must deduce things about the painting that was taken. Who did it? Why did they do it? Well, it turns out in the painting is the subject of a very nefarious crime, the target of which was one of the refugees that have been forced to live in sort of a shantytown area. And by discovering things and learning things about what happened to the painting, to the target, and all that, to the person who stole it, you learn a lot. And so Sherlock must now do what he must to, get justice for these people. For the refugees, for the victim. He wants to do what's right. The problem is, in order to do what's truly right, you have to do something. You might have to do something that compromises your principles. And this is the case. You can either deal with a real gangster of a person who can promise to do the most they can to help all the refugees. Doing the real best for the one who was raped. Yeah, I said it. Because it's the truth. That's what happened to her. And all the refugees. You could do something for the refugees, if not just for her, for the victim, by dealing with the person who was being blackmailed. Because he's high up in the politics. Or you could just say screw it all and give it to the press to let it be known. Which may not get, it brings the attention to the public eye. But does it take care of everything else? You never know. The choice is yours and yours to make. And our friend Werner will accept whatever you choose. After that, we get another invite from Werner for bringing you into, as well as another gift as well. After each one of these main cases, we open up a room in the house that we didn't have access to before. It's very educational, what we learn. After the first one, we open up his mother's room. After the second one, we open up a room called the Cabinet of Curiosities. As Mrs. Holmes was very wise and could spot fake artifacts. Hence, the room is filled with all these clever fakes, including one that pays homage to one of the best known Sherlock games. We continue through the place, learning as much as we can about stuff. And of all things we run across, but I'm not going to go into that now. I shouldn't. Because each room opens up something, like some childhood memory, that links together to the main story, the case known as A Mother's Love. But we then move to Sacrificial Lamb. In which we are invited to a party. A very hedonistic party. Full of every vice out there. And during this, we learn that there's been a murder. And one person ends up being presumed guilty of this murder. But I'll get to that in a moment. You see, Sherlock is called in to investigate it discreetly. And we learn only certain people have access to the room where the murder was committed in. But just as we go to seek out those to investigate and talk to about the crime, well, police raid the place. They were tipped off to the party. This was done by the estate head's major domo, i.e., the one in charge of the house, who was actually a nephew of his. A bit of a, quote, disgrace to the family, if you were to ask the host of the party. And while evidence points to one person being guilty, you know he's not guilty. That's Werner. So you have to figure out who is the real murderer, why, and what should they have happened to them. You've got three possible suspects: the major domo, another person who's the friend of the victim, and the host himself. I'd like to say I would have gladly, but preferred I ended up making different choices, but because what you discover is the hedonistic lifestyle crossed over to a very, very questionable the host scene is more or less a bit of a predator when it comes down to it. You then have the choices. One has to pay for the crime. One of them has to pay. Was it the major domo? Was it the friend? Was it the host? Personally, I went with the host. He was the most despicable. And Werner is allowed to go free. But Werner also gives a warning to Sherlock that he's going to have to do something or else he's going to get consumed by his own gifts and talents. Sounds like concern. It is now that we're able to open up the last area in the house, which is the garden. And once you go into the garden, you enter the end game. So, throughout the game, you come across, like, as I said before, little side quests, side cases. Police cases that eventually lead to you discovering what happened to the old chief inspector. Cases where you are to help Mycroft in solving some of his problems and issues, some of which are very interesting because you have a gentleman who has secrets, but if they get out, it could be very detrimental. But you also have, he's also being hunted by mob individuals or organized crime individuals who he's crossed. So Mycroft has to make a deal with them to help get this person taken care of. Another informant whose daughter's been abducted by slavers. It's the one time I actually felt like it was right to kill the people, but even though I didn't, I accidentally killed one. Of course, if they're slavers, I don't care. That's detestable. And a last one, which one informant, or one associate, who was working in, I believe, City Hall, went missing. Turns out that she was grave robbing. Add to it that there are one set of side missions are known as, well, it is known for, it was called M for Mystery, in which we investigate an extortion that happens as well as someone who got killed, who organized a kill and then jumped from a bridge and killed themselves. So what do we have? They're working for somebody who's orchestrating things, someone who is back at the hotel that you started the whole game in. And by the time you find them, they've left. But there's only one thing that tips you off to it. It is a piece of document that I found early, so I don't know if it was in the main game or because I had all the DLC come in which we learn, it mentions a article regarding astronomical phenomena. And for those of you who know your Sherlock lore, you know that there is a math professor who did author such an article, and that he already spotted Sherlock Holmes as a talent. Yes, this person was Professor James Moriarty before he became a professor. That he was already working in criminal circles. We have some side cases, like where which involves a young magician who also sees John or knows that John exists, which surprises Sherlock. A man trapped in a safe died who was trapped in a safe, but who killed him? I can think of somebody. Uh, a blind duel. Mm, interesting one there. And one of the fun DLC, which I truly enjoyed, which involves a case of someone having, a magician where they perform shows. Again, woman who dresses as a man performs shows, does very well actually. They know their magic tricks, but somebody has been using these tricks to commit crimes. A Frenchman. And if you know the original series, they did a game called Nemesis, where Sherlock Holmes was faced off against French thief, a gentleman thief, Arsène Lupin. Well, this would have been quote, the first encounter. And because at the time, the author of Arsène Lupin, who wanted to write a story with them crossing paths, wasn't necessarily allowed to, he changed the name in a very, very, very obvious rearrangement as Hemlock Sholmes. You even hear a recording of Lupin taunting Sherlock. But he concedes, he gets away but leaves everything behind, telling him to do what he must with it. And let's face it, some of the people who were victimized by these crimes, they were not necessarily good people. At least not in the moral fiber sense. Now, of course, you also have other things that float around, like a fun little side mystery case, finding out who's been killing sailors, why, finding treasures on the island. That's a fun little one. Finding out some secrets of past things. And finding out some other things for other things. Because Sherlock is not necessarily big into the quote supernatural, although that's going to change. But, you do what you want. Because once you enter that garden, it's the end game. Because once you enter the garden, you start to piece together certain details of the past. We know that Sherlock's mother was not well. That is revealed during the story. And that Mycroft tended to blame the doctor treating her. In the end, the doctor the doctor is dismissed. But he's also been sticking around for obvious reasons. I mean, he's worried. What ends up happening is this. Because as we relive these memories, we see what happens. Violet Holmes got ill after Sherlock Holmes' father passed away. And as we continue, we see in a memory Sherlock gently pushing his mother's wheelchair around the garden. And when she mentions about, when doing something with something in the garden, when the father returns, Sherlock reminds her that he passed away. Violet, in her state of mind, didn't take that kindly, calling him a liar, and almost drowning him. It was the doctor who saved Sherlock. But because of everything that happened, Mycroft arriving in time too, but not necessarily knowing the full truth. Or he did know the truth and was aware of it. But it seemed that the death of Violet Holmes, while accidental, because the doctor was trying to revive her at the time that Mycroft came across things. It was just easier to protect Sherlock by the fabrication that the doctor pay for the crime, the apparent crime. This is when we learn that the existence of John has always been to, quote, help protect Sherlock from the truth. His own way of keeping the truth hidden from himself. It explains why Sherlock always blacks out while near water. One of the key mechanics of the game. Of course, you are allowed to decide what happens. This all affects the ending in slight ways. We are also learned that after that, once we decide on the facts and how they play out, that Werner Vogel is actually the doctor's brother. Was he looking for revenge? Was he looking for something else? You never truly know. But he leaves Sherlock with a parting gift. A painting. I don't know if it changes depending on the choices you make. In the end, though, Sherlock will leave Cordona then. Return to England. And we open, and then that ending cinematic opens with a man walking down a hall. To where Sherlock Holmes is. A man who had just got back from the fight in Afghanistan. And yes, there was turmoil in there back in the late 1800s. Sherlock was busy doing a bit of a study. Does the body bruise after the body dies? Or after the victim dies? This scene is right out of A Study in Scarlet, which details how Dr. John Watson, and Sherlock Holmes met. And for a brief moment, you do see that Sherlock's imaginary friend John sort of overlays an image on John Watson. And this is where the story ends. This game was brilliant, as it was truly an open world Sherlock Holmes. I haven't, at the time of this recording, started Sherlock Holmes Awakened part of this timeline, this reboot timeline. And so, I wonder how they're going to incorporate an open world into that game, because that game was set over multiple areas. Doesn't make it easy to finish an area and then move on. Didn't go back in that one. Well, you couldn't go back to some areas in that one. I mean, the original of that was set in like about 3, 4 different locations. This is a fun game. This was a very fun experience. An open world Sherlock Holmes, pretty much done right. I liked it. It was so enjoyable. It took me maybe about intermittently between your recordings 2 years to get through it, but it was worth it. I loved it every minute. There were some recording issues, of course, but play this game. If you love Sherlock Holmes, play this game. This is beautifully done. And that's all I'm going to say about Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1. I thank you all for listening if you've listened all the way through. And take care and have fun. Bye.